My name is Sheila Lamb, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC Network. For those of you that are not familiar with our organization, the Virginia Small Business Development Center is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 26 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses in their local communities. Our one-on-one advising services are available at no charge. Today's webinar, How Craft Producers Can Build Impactful Collaboration Projects, is presented by the Virginia SBDC Network. We are recording today's presentation, and it will be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of participants, everyone's microphone is muted, but if you have questions during the presentation, you can type those into the Q&A box. We have also enabled the live transcript function, which you can show or hide via your own meeting controls. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the Virginia SBDC Craft Beverage Assistance Program Manager, Chris Van Orden.
All right. Thank you so much, Sheila. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this conversation about how craft beverage producers can design and execute mutually beneficial collaboration projects. As Sheila said, my name is Chris Van Orden, and I'm the manager of the Craft Beverage Assistance Program at the Virginia SBDC at George Mason University. The CBA program is designed to provide industry-specific assistance to Virginia's craft beverage sector. So today's program is going to be a free-flowing discussion on why and how breweries, wineries, cideries, and distilleries should think about working with partners on product releases and events. You'll be able to enter any questions you might have in the Q&A function, not the chat, Q&A. It's easier to manage on our end, and we'll do our best to answer all of your questions either during or after the webinar. So with that, I'm excited to welcome Phil Runco, beer industry veteran with years of experience in the public-facing side of the sector. Phil has written about beer and music since 2009, contributing to publications such as Time Out, Thrillist, Brightest Young Things, and DC Beer. He currently oversees social media and coordinates special projects for one of DC's the DC area's leading breweries, while also handling communications and written works for a pioneering nomadic beer brewery. In 2022, the North American Guild of Beer Writers designated his article, Little Fish, Big Tail, How Fast Fashion Caught Its Own Hop, the year's best profile. Welcome, Phil. Thanks for joining us.
Howdy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we'll dive right in. So we're talking collaborations today, and there's a lot of forms that collaborations can take. Product releases, events, marketing campaigns, never mind all of the kind of behind the scenes partnerships that happen in this very chummy industry. To start off, I'd like to hear your thoughts, as a driver of these kinds of projects, on why companies should invest in collaboration.
Sure. So this might be the longest that I go on about. So at the outset, don't get freaked out. I'm going to talk for 20 minutes on every answer. But I do feel like this is an especially, the responses here are like especially plentiful, because I view collaboration as really just kind of low-hanging fruit and something that can really be a driver for a brand. I at Ocelot, which is the local brewery that I work for, am helping lead partnerships with bands and often with breweries, and we'll kind of get into both those things later. And then I also work with Stillwater, who really is one of the pioneers of collaborating across the board. And so throughout this sort of conversation, I'll draw on references to those breweries, since those are the two with which I both work and know the most. But at the sort of the most base level, I don't want to say crass, but just kind of dollars and cents, collaborations are co-branding exercises, right? So the hope is to reach a new audience. I would say one of the main goals is, so you're exposing your name and your brand to another brand's followers, right? And so the hope is that they would say, I like brand A, and if they're affiliating with brand B, then that sort of is the indication that I should be paying attention to them and trying whatever it is that they're producing. So you build your brand, you build your following. Hopefully that translates into, at the very least, social media cultivation. But hopefully even beyond that, it leads to someone buying. They go to a store, they see your product, they remember you from the collaboration, and they're more likely to give it a shot. In terms of collaborations, I think about it as there's kind of two buckets. One is sort of within your industry narrowly, a similar type of producer, and then another one is going to be collaborating with an entity that's outside of it. And when you're collaborating with another producer who does a similar product, you're obviously going to be exposing your name to an audience that is interested in the kind of things that you are producing. But I think there's also value in exposing your brand to someone who maybe isn't into whatever your beverage is, right? Who isn't a beer person. So, the goal, I think, is to do a little bit of both, right? And I think there's value in both beyond just the exposure component, but that is going to be a big part of it. So that being the big picture answer, there's sort of like more, I wouldn't call them, niche, but sort of, more specific goals. One would be if you are entering into a new market and you want to sort of introduce your brand to that market. If you know someone in that market, maybe that makes sense to partner with them on a product. So for example, something that Chris was involved with in a past life, Schlafly Beer produces a lot, sells beer almost exclusively in Missouri, but they're sending beer to the DC area. And although they're not entering the market, it might make sense for them to do a collaboration with Port City and say, hey, you like Port City? We're Schlafly. We do something similar. We're from over there. Allow us to introduce ourselves if you're not already familiar. That's kind of the introduction sort of route. The other sort of types of people you could partner with might be, big brands. Stillwater has a collaboration series right now with Filson, which is like a large, clothing, outdoor gear manufacturer. I mean, that's a kind of like a big corporate one, with a lot of levels of everything you would expect in a corporate sort of partnership, all the sort of corporate bureaucracy of and long lead times. But obviously if you can get something like that, that's kind of like a whale of sorts. But at a more local level, restaurants, sellers of your product, right? So this is what I kind of consider, pun intended, retail politics, right? So if you're able to partner with a grocery store or a bottle shop, that's something we see more and more these days. I mean, if you walk into a Giant in DC, you're going to see collaborations with Aslan and with Port City and with Right Proper. And so I think there are very sort of tangible effects of that, right? In one sense, you're rewarding an account for carrying your beer, your product, whatever it may be. Exclusives are cool for them. You're probably going to be pre-selling all of that product. Great. You're obviously not going to be able to sell that product anywhere else, but you take that into account for how much you're going to produce. It'll probably be prominently displayed. That's great. Little ad within the stores. And maybe you're building that relationship for future sales there, right? Kind of more generally, part of my sort of enthusiasm about this is that I think collaborations are kind of an easy way to differentiate a particular release and also to tap into some signal boosting. What I mean by that is that the marketplace is just kind of crowded. And if your model isn't flagship, and if it is more flagship, then you might be a little more I wouldn't say choosy, but you're going to have less opportunities to do these. But if you're releasing a lot of different products and they're just kind of general, here's I'm obviously going to rely on beer a lot, but it's just kind of here's a Kolsch, and you already make a Pilsner and a Czech lager, and it's a little way to kind of just say, hey, this is a collaboration with, insert X other brewery, or really anyone else that just kind of maybe might catch someone's attention as to oh, here's another random beer release, but also that entity is going to be promoting it, right? I mean, this is the sort of the cross promotional component. And so, it's one of these things where I think like people who are hesitant to do it are sort of just leaving that promotional help and differentiation on the table. And it doesn't have to be, I've collaborated with breweries in my capacity as a beer writer. Okay. And so, there's a brewery that we'll mention a few times because I'm particularly close with them, out in Virginia, Waterford, called Wheatland Spring. And we make a beer called Alberto together. It's named after my grandfather, and it's not as if my face is on the can. You got to turn it around to see I'm on there, but it doesn't matter. Anytime that beer is released, I, as a person with some social media reach, am talking about it. I'm relaying the backstory. I'm doing free promotion for them because I'm just excited about the project, and the beer can stand alone. I'm just helping it, right? So you don't have to lean too far into the collaboration to get that promotion. But if you want to lean into it, if you're proud of it, that works too. Everyone is sort of different, right? It's just, you kind of got to approach each as its own individual thing and not necessarily have, a template. And I think people, almost to a slightly humorous sometimes degree, get super excited about collaborations, particularly in beer, because they think there's some alchemy that is occurring when two brands get together. I call it A plus B equals OMG, where they're just like, oh my gosh, Trillium and Other Half came together and had a IPA baby. And at the end of the day, some collaborations are super collaborative and very creative. And sometimes it's just kind of like simple cross branding. And I don't even know how much conversation is going on there. I like to think that the collaborations that I've been involved with are of the kind of more in the weeds, meaningful, trying to find a good narrative, trying to highlight what it is that another entity, whether it be a band or a brewery, does, and then wedding our two strengths and then using this beer to talk about those strengths, right? But regardless, people get very excited about them, and it's good to tap into that excitement. I have just a few more. I promise you this is going to be my longest. Related to that, though, it is kind of a nice excuse to do a collaboration, particularly with just a one-off, which I think most collaborations tend to be, but they don't have to be. It's a good excuse to get creative if you want to. Sometimes having that sort of boost that comes from the excitement around a collab can give you an excuse to do something that on its own might lack a little bit of that sort of pizzazz, right? Like, a beer that might not get people excited, like the Schlafly, Port City one that I mentioned earlier was like a Ruby Mild, which, a Ruby Mild by itself, probably not going to get everyone super excited, but you add that little bit of, collab pizzazz, and it's going to help, the odds of it moving. And I tend to like collaborations on the creative side that are what I call sort of home and away, which is that, one brewery does one beer and then either concurrently the other brewery makes one and you release it together, or you kind of space it out. We just did one Ocelot with Wheatland Spring called Mirror Sisters. They put out a Mirror Sister. We put out a Mirror Sister. One's a lager, one's an IPA, and it's sort of like conceptually tied together. I won't get into it, but it's a nice way to sort of, again, drum up excitement, do something a little creative you might not otherwise do. Separately but related, it's a good learning opportunity. If there is a brand, a producer that you think does something particularly well, and you're friends with them, it may be a good opportunity to try to make that thing and get kind of a look under the hood. You'll learn something. You might also learn something in how they kind of like roll out their products. It's just kind of a chance to work closely with someone and get a view. Obviously, you can have these conversations, but kind of get it to see it in IRL is I think incredibly valuable. Sometimes you can collaborate with one of the producers of an input that you use. That's another sort of good reason to do it. I know Ocelot often collaborates with Jasper Yeast, which is a yeast provider that's next door. we showcase a yeast that they're excited about, and we put their name on the can, and we get free yeast. And it's not like we're not doing it just for the free yeast, but it is sort of that mutually beneficial thing where we do get something out of it insofar as they're donating something for the promotion of their product that we are doing by putting it on our can and talking about it online. And that can apply to, a malt stirrer for beer, at least, right? Hops, maybe the barrels, an adjunct like fruit or coffee, uses it as an opportunity to showcase those ingredients, if they're quality ingredients that you're excited to talk about. And then, hopefully you get a little bit of like a financial discount perk out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then sort of the last bucket of things, which I'll make quick, is just sort of the intangibles. One is there's being associated with brands that make products that you think are of high quality. I think is important because it signals to people that that there is a like it kind of goes back to the initial point, but there is a like-minded producer doing something, and then someone else who's kind of just quickly doing research. Like I do this all the time. Maybe it's not the best way to look up other breweries, but if I heard of a brewery, I kind of look up who have they made beers with. And if it's a bunch of breweries that I know make good beer, I'm like, oh, well, they're in good company, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that you have to, necessarily view it as like a social climber, where like, oh, I only want to do stuff with high clout breweries.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully, you're friends with people who make quality stuff, and over time, regardless of where they are sort of in their popularity, you're never going to regret making something with someone who makes good stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I'll follow back up on that later in a subsequent question, I think. But the very last thing in the intangible category is that I think it is a good way to build out your sort of brand identity outside of just what it is that you're making. And so this sort of leads into, what I'm doing at Ocelot now, which is that this year we will have made 5 beers with sort of indie rock bands that I love. And part of the reason for that is that, Ocelot has always been, we're a brewery that cares about music. We're a music loving brewery, right? And so I kind of said, well, if this is who we are, shouldn't we be making beers with bands? Doesn't that align with what it is that we say we are? And so you find collaborations, outside of necessarily your product market, but with things that sort of reflect well upon what it is that you say you are. So that's my super long answer to all the reasons to collaborate.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, lots of good reasons for it. And I mean, you can't deny the market value sort of transactional nature of it, but I really like some of those secondary and tertiary reasons that you mentioned, the, ability for your team to gain skills, right? I know some collaborations where somebody said, hey, I love that these folks know how to do this. We don't know how to do that well yet. Let's go figure that out. Or if there's a product that you've been wanting to make and it just doesn't fit your brand identity currently, and we want to stretch our product range. Hey, maybe I'm a distillery. I've only ever made grain-based spirits, but I've always been a huge rum fan. Well, maybe you partner with somebody and you say, this is going to be my opportunity. I'm going to try to get something, dip my toe in the water without having to put my whole brand up as, oh, all of a sudden we're doing this. Like, no, it started as a collaboration, get rolling in that direction. I even like it as a reward for the team sometimes. Like, hey, we get out of the brewery, we get out of the winery, we're going to go visit some friends, have a nice day of it. And the company you keep as part of what your brand identity is, right? Not every time are you gonna be able to have people come visit you in person, and then it just comes down to label art and things like that. Well, by associating with other brands, people can start to triangulate. Oh, this company, the people behind this company, here's what they value, here's where their tastes lie. I could see myself in them in a lot of ways, and that just strengthens the tie to the consumer. So I think all of that stuff, lots of good reasons to do it. Hopefully by virtue of being here, people at least see some value. But I think especially if you're in a company where you need to get buy-in from other people, explaining lots of reasons, right? Even if this is not going to be the biggest seller straight out the gate. there's a value to it. So because this industry tends to be one that is both chummy and has some degree of cool appeal, although I will, kind of raise my hand as being a part of that. There's no shortage of opportunities for collaboration. There's always people interested. So in your experience, kind of either we can frame it two ways: what makes a good partner, or what are some red flags when you're kind of working through a potential partnership to say maybe we shouldn't go through with this?
Sure. I'd say number one, in terms of what you're looking for, and this is something that I alluded to earlier, is the quality component, right? Because you're going to meet a lot of people who are in the industry and you might be good friends with, and they might not make a product, especially if they're going to make a collaboration at their place and put your name on it. That might be the first time that someone is exposed to your brand.
Mm-hmm.
And they could be the coolest person in the world. But if they're not making something that you're proud to have your name on, and that you are comfortable with that being your brand's first exposure to someone, it might not be someone with whom you want to make something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I had mentioned, the importance of sort of association before, and I wanted to be clear about that sort of, chasing clout idea, because, Ocelot and Wheatland Spring, to use an example with which I'm familiar, we made a collaboration with them, maybe when they were less than a year old, right? And so they had, barely, they were just getting started out, but they were making exceptional beer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really all we needed to know, right? To be like, we want to be affiliated with this brand, right? And now 4 years later, they are have this big following, and well earned, because they make good beer. They're getting invited to all these cool festivals. We've made probably 4 different projects, 7 different beers with them, but it was never about, what is this brand going to do to help us? It was, we just want to make sure that we are affiliating with people that we think are making good beer. And over time, the other stuff will pan out, right? So I always want to say, don't go. I'm saying don't go chasing waterfalls, but don't go chasing clout. Just stick to affiliating yourself with people that make high quality stuff. Another consideration is just their brand in general. Not everyone is going to have a voice online or a packaging motif that aligns with your brand, right? And again, they may be great people, they may make quality beer, but you may not want to affiliate with people that have crass labels, or making sexual puns, or have said things that you think don't align with your values in the press. And so it's just don't go running into these things. Try to do a little bit of research first, and it's easier to do that than it is to get realize too late that you shouldn't have partnered with someone.
Yeah.
In terms of red flags, I'm always very cautious that I want, you can tell when you're talking early, if someone is responsive, and if someone is following up on your sort of initial conversations. And if they're not, maybe don't chase it, because that sort of lack of responsiveness, it's like, not trying to change the person you're dating, right? It's like that person might not be the right speed for you, and they might not be responsive when you really need them, when it's later and you're trying to push, really try to get promotional support behind it. And I think that ties into also sort of getting a sense of their enthusiasm. And if they have sort of a lack of enthusiasm, and it feels like you're sort of
dragging them along,
then it's not worth it. It's not worth it. We had a bad experience within the past couple of years with a brewery that we felt like we were just constantly pestering them, and even though we were friends with them, and at the end of it, I kind of turned to some other people within Ocelot, and was like, life's too short to collaborate with people that don't bring you joy. And so, it's often not going to be worth it. And those signs are going to be there, right? If that people generally show who they are kind of early on. But that's what I have, Chris.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. I think, yeah, excitement, of course, like you said in the beginning, so many forms that this can take. You can have all kinds of partners. Obviously, if you're working with a band, you may not be looking to them for recipe development, but hey, a willingness and openness, having a little bit of a two-way street, even if you're the one that's doing the labor, just, are you willing to put it up an Instagram post? Like, I hope so, because the value of this is mutually growing our audiences, right? So like people that if you find yourself trying to convince somebody of the value of it, it's already, I don't want to say that the battle's been lost, but you're already starting off on the wrong side of the equation where like, I shouldn't have to convince, right? This is great. It should be fun. And when it works, I don't want to say it's effortless, but it feels like, you're both active participants in it. So that leads to kind of, let's say you do decide, okay, collaboration, we're greenlit, we're going to do this, whether it's a band, an institution, or a retailer, another producer. What do you do to sort of lay the groundwork, get things in place to, okay, start mobilizing this? How do you kind of draw up that plan of action?
Sure. So a lot will depend on sort of, if they are a fellow producer of whatever it is you're making, or if they are in the industry, or if they are completely outside the industry, right? So I would say in those first two buckets, particularly in the producer one, I think they'll probably have a general sense of like how this works, right? So, you'll talk to them about, what particular type of product you want to make, what's your timeline, is there already a concept? It's usually best, I feel like, when collaborations come out of the good idea, as opposed to let's do a collaboration and then we'll figure out what we're going to do later. It's usually, I feel like, most creative when it starts with, what would be cool if we did this together, and then everything kind of goes out from there. And then it's just kind of nailing down, recipe formulation, figuring out the timing. Obviously, it's best when you can have them there. Everyone gets pictures. I know it's cheesy. People love pictures of collaboration day, but, so try to align all of that. And, if maybe it makes sense at that point to sort of say, here's what we sort of would expect from you, in terms of, if you are looking for certain promotional things, I think it's always best to be over communicative than it is to not say it and expect it and then be disappointed and then have to follow up, right? Just say like, hey, at the outset, here's what we kind of hope that you would do. Like, I know Stillwater, like, forever had like kind of like a contract arrangement with any sort of a collaborator that was just kind of pro forma. Here's what we expect from you, right? And that obviously comes from being a larger entity than it is a kind of a more upstart, couple years old entity. But I still think if that is that important to you, then do it, right? Like, be upfront about it. Don't be passive aggressive about it. With an entity that is outside of your production. So I have a lot of experience this year with making beers with bands, and usually I go through the labels, and the labels are part of the table as well. I kind of have an initial pitch where I'm very explicit about, we'd like to make a beer with your creative input. We're big fans. The goal of this is to make something cool while also promoting your record, which is my way of sort of signaling we're not going to be profit sharing with you on this. Like, we are providing a promotional function, and hopefully, we're getting some recognition at the same time. But we'll kind of get to later sometimes, and sometimes people might not be cool with that arrangement, which either you have to adapt or the collaboration isn't for you. And like I said, we can get to there. But then if they express some interest, then I say, hey, let's have a conversation. It's going to be Zoom, because usually these bands are outside of the DC area, or they have been, in our experience, they've been generally outside of the country. But then I want to set up a conversation, just say, hey, like, what kind of beer do you want? Like, what are the range of options? And hopefully you try to steer them into something that you'd make anyway. Or if they, there's going to be sort of like you have to kind of impress upon them, like, hey, like we can't make a bourbon barrel aged stout in 6 weeks, right? You have to sort of try to explain to them how this works. But then I want to know, do you have any ideas on label art? Do you have any ideas on the name? Those are kind of the big 3 things. What are we making? What are we calling it? What's the art going to be? And so, even if we're not going to figure that all out on the call, but I want to get sort of a sense from them of what I'm working with. And then I can go back, or we can follow back up. We did a beer with the clientele. The lead singer allowed us a selection of his sort of paintings. And so we chose one with Protomartyr, another band we did something with. It was very important, or their sort of main ask was that they design the label themselves. And so, that took a little bit of a conversation with the Ocelot creative director. And I don't know if we would do that again. But nevertheless, it turned out incredible. And I was just, I thought it was incredibly cool that they would want to do it, because then as someone who is marketing the beer, I'm like, we have a beer. Not only is it with the band, but they made the label. How cool is that? Don't you want that? Right? Like, it features like outtakes from the album cover shoot, right? So I'm always like, how do we make the coolest thing possible? And then, sometimes, I learned a lesson there not to promise too much. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like generally my approach when it comes to sort of collaborating with people who are, outside of the industry.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's it's a good lesson, right? Knowing all of the stakeholders on both sides of the equation, what their rules of the road are. Because if one person gets hung up on some particular aspect, saying we're not bringing in a new yeast, or hey, I'm a winemaker, we've only ever made grapes from these regions, or we don't do that style. Like, okay, like that's the rules of the road. As long as going in, that's fine. And then you can have conversations if you want to expand beyond the comfort zone. But I have a friend who always says clear is kind, unclear is unkind, where the easiest way for it to go awry is by talking past one another in the early stages. And then as you get into implementation and product is in the tank, labels are getting designed, and there's a divergence, and by then money's been spent, and it can be very painful to do that, especially if one person's shouldering the costs and the burden, but the other party has strong takes. So I think you're right on that front of just, hey, being, if anything, erring on the side of communicativeness. So you mentioned something that I wanted to latch onto as well. You mentioned sort of signaling, hey, we're not doing a profit sharing model here, right? That's not something that we do. There's no exchange of money on this side. Just, it's not really something that you're not trying to license out somebody's band name or whatever the case may be. Are there any other models or structures for collaboration that you've either learned the hard way to steer clear of, or that you just say, hey, we don't pursue that path?
Yeah, I mean, that's been the main one, although I do have sort of a corollary onto that. And I do think that model can work for people, right? Like, the bigger your collaborator, the more those odds of, just sort of going at it with a handshake goes away. And that's kind of the rules of the road, right? So, Stillwater made a beer with rapper and Food Network star Action Bronson, right? And he is way more famous than Stillwater, right? And so, the idea that he would just, he's in the business of making money off of his name, right? And so they entered into an arrangement, signed a contract saying, we'll give you X amount. I approached a band called Slow Dive, who are kind of a great, I wasn't sure, I knew the lead singer was into beer. And so I talked to their creative marketing director at the label that they're on. And she was like, yeah, I'm super into this. Like, since I know they'll ask like what is the profit sharing? What is the social media obligations? And what's the contract? And I was like, well, we don't have any of that. This isn't really what we're doing. But, if someone wanted to make a beer with them, they're receptive. You just have to, be prepared to both present that information and, make less money, but also maybe you gain a lot more exposure by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, if you're a super small, a local producer and it's a one-off beer, it's probably not going to be like, they're not going to make, even if I told Slow Dive, we're going to give you 30% of what they make, they'd be like, we make that on the merch table every night. Like, this isn't worth us even talking about it unless they were just super into the idea of wanting to make it. And ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
I think with a lot of people, that's the question. It's not like they get excited about wanting to make a beer or whatever the product is together. And the other stuff doesn't even matter. But if someone is like, the bigger the band you get, the more sort of you become sort of a corporate entity, which is cool, make money. I'm not against that. But it's just the odds of sort of just striking up sort of the type of handshake agreement works. A different example, though, in a situation where we were approached, there is a brewery in Texas with whom I've become sort of good friends, and they've done these collaborations with this sort of like math rock metal-y bands. And so this band is like very popular, right? They have like 500,000 followers on Instagram, right? The bands we're doing stuff with it's like 7,000, 15, 20,000. It's not about that. But the project they came to us says, hey, like they're doing a tour and we're setting up collaborations with other breweries in sort of cities where they are playing. And so we would love you to be part of this project. You make the beer in collaboration with us and then time it with their release. And I said, oh, well, in my head, I thought, this band doesn't really align with the kind of bands that we're collaborating with. Does this fit, despite the fact that this band is very popular, right? Separately, I then went and talked to our brew team and they were like, oh, we love this band. And I said, okay, well, I have to continue with this conversation, out of almost like a fiduciary duty. And so I then said, okay, like, how does this work? And my big questions were, is the recipe set? Can we get to be creative with the recipe? A, and then B, is the art set, or do we get to be creative with the art? Because I learned my lesson with the Protomartyr beer that, we generally like to be involved in all the creative aspects, right? And it turned out that we could do some stuff with the recipe, but the label was set. The band designed it. And so even though here's this opportunity with a band that has 500,000 followers, and that the name of the game is just, getting exposure, that would have made a lot of sense. We passed on it because it just wasn't in line with what it is that makes us happy as a creative business. And there also were some questions about us being able to the hurdles of selling it in Maryland, where we don't do a lot of distro, where the concert is. But anyway, the point is, like, you kind of got to approach each of these individually, and just how they're sort of set up might not be for you.
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson, a real world lesson, right? I imagine some of the folks tuning in have been approached by people, at a much more advanced stage, much larger audience, or much smaller. You can make that decision, but to scale up or scale down, like, some of it is, are you reaching? Are you trying to lift somebody up behind you? Whatever the case is, making sure that it's the right fit for you, that you're able to execute on it, that the scale is appropriate. It's certainly difficult if somebody says, okay, we're going to do this, but it's going to go into every giant store in Virginia. And okay, well, now we have to realign production, and there's the opportunity cost of doing this versus just doing what you normally do. And, if it doesn't feel comfortable, it's okay. It's okay to punt. So, I don't think that there's any collaboration that you might have the opportunity to pursue, but turn down, that's going to ruin your business, right? It's okay. And it's okay to say, hey, we're not ready for it right now. But, we're ramping up. It's the fall. We've got a lot of product about to go out. We can't fit it in the calendar, come back around to us next time. It's okay. Right. So don't be shy about standing up for yourself as to like, this is how we work. This just doesn't, align with us right now. We're adding production capacity. We're adding some team members. We feel like we'll be there in a year if you're still interested. That's all right. So again, something comes together, you set it up. How do you both, on your side of the equation and, the partners that you're working with, kind of structure the promotional side of this? Like, what are your asks? What are the expectations? How do you kind of make sure everyone's pulling their weight in kind of the rollout of this collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to try to make it easy for everyone, right? And part of that is just, particularly with like the band collaborations where we are putting out a press release, I'm going to draft that plenty of time in advance. I'm going to provide it to them. I'm going to ask for their input. I'm going to have their buy-in. And so, hopefully in doing so, they're going to, take some ownership over this and will be more likely to then share it, to promote it themselves. At the level that I am at with the breweries, or that the breweries are at, I'm not necessarily like, again, Stillwater Filson is a different type of story, but like kind of just like a band stuff, I'm kind of like, it'd be great if you could share it. I'm gonna like, it's so easy these days with Instagram to add the collaborators, right? And I actually had a conversation with Polyvinyl Records yesterday. We have a collaboration with a band called Palehound coming out in October, and they were just like explicitly like, tag us in everything, put us on this. I think you need to realize that, and hopefully the other side realizes that you are promoting them. They are promoting you, you are promoting them. With bands, they're the record label. Artists can maybe be a little bit sort of like have an uneasy relationship with commerce sometimes, but record labels do not. They're just trying to sell records. And so, having them involved in it, providing them what they need, even if they're not making money for it, you are providing them this sort of, you are promoting them in the same way that doing like, an interview would. If coming from the writer side, if I did an interview with the band, the hope would always be that they would share it, right? Because they, that would get in front of their audience, they would read it, and it would promote their record, even though they're not benefiting from the clicks on that story, right?
Yeah. I'm sure that, when you're dealing with other producers, or if you're dealing with a retailer, they have a better understanding that this directly leads to sales, that, hey, even if you're in a creative space, in the end, like, this is how you make a living. It may not be everybody's most exciting thing. I know that I am by no means a digital native. I'm a little too old to have grown up on Instagram or anything, but I certainly see the value in it. And I think having even just, whoever's the sharpest on the team to do making it very easy, like you said, of like, hey, I'm going to create a Dropbox folder, we're going to put images, I'm going to give you my nice logo so that if you're putting it up, you're not just snipping it from online.
Right.
Like, I'm going to give you the copy so that if you're putting a post up, you have language, you don't have to worry about rewriting it. If you don't know how to use social media, the SBDC, there are always classes and things to just say like, hey, I want to get comfortable making the most of this, making it easy so that if I'm not used to using Instagram and my collaborator isn't, but our audiences sure do, just make it, a couple of steps. It doesn't have to be hard. It's a really great way to just put it out there. It doesn't have to just be like, traditional media. Although I'm sure we could have a whole conversation about earned media, you and I, about the importance of actually going out and, telling your story, but that's for another thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we're gonna be pouring at this October Forest Fest, out, which is a kind of a festival out in Chincoteague, organized by Black Narrows Brewing in collaboration with the like a nature conservatory group. And they have been just, for everything, they were like, here are your digital assets, right? Here are the Instagram stories. Here's the Instagram post. Here is everything you need. If you want to post about this, nudge, nudge, like, please draw upon this, and we've done the work for you. And if you're doing a big event as opposed to just a kind of one-off release, your partners will certainly appreciate it, even if it does involve a little bit more work on your side.
Yeah, make it easy for them, especially if you have somebody who's good at that. Because this takes so many forms, right? Especially when you're dealing with, alcohol industry, and you're dealing if there's money exchanging hands, it can be a handshake thing, but it could also be a little bit more formal and a little more complicated. So are there any sensitivities or regulations that you bumped up against, or you try to keep in mind when you're designing these collaboration projects?
Yeah, I think in terms of sensitivities, it's always good before the beer is brewed to just say, it's easier to transfer product to breweries now than it used to be. And so, just have that conversation about like how much because usually these days, particularly local collaborations, the idea is that, there's the brewery that makes it and then the brewery that is not making it. But the idea is that the brewery that is not making it will take in a certain amount of the product, at wholesale cost and then sell it themselves, right? Mm-hmm. And so having that conversation about how much you expect them to take, and that may differ based upon the yield, right? Like you can't be sure, but having that conversation at the front of what the expectation is for sales is important. Something that I've encountered with the band collaborations is being very upfront, which I am, but sometimes it doesn't quite get through, about like where this beer will be sold, right? Like we only distribute in 3 states. And so, you don't want them getting out there and saying our new beer available for mail order when we don't. That happened with one of these beers. I never said we did mail order. I don't know where that came from, but then they said it, and we had to kind of say, oh, actually, like we really aren't set up for that. And not over promising. Like we've had a bit of issue getting our beer into music venues because they are just very comfortable with the insanely high profit margin on the beers they sell, that even losing $1 on a beer is on per can for 2 cases is like cataclysmic. And so, I'm very careful now when talking to a partner about not overselling. We're going to have this in the venue. Everyone's going to be drinking it during the show, right? There are these sort of hurdles to keep in mind. But that being said, if you want to do something like, have a release of it in New York, like you can get temporary distribution, and you just, as far as you could handle that in advance and not leave it to the last second, the better.
Yeah. And I think that's another good reason to potentially pursue collaborations. If you're working with an out-of-state partner on something, or in a territory you're not currently serving, it could be a good way to soft roll your entire product line there. Say, hey, we've collaborated with somebody you trust in this market, whether it's a band or if it's a venue or if it's another producer. Hey, like all of a sudden, my name, we work with a Chicago area distillery, right? Like, hey, there's mutual trust here. Maybe that kind of gets your name out there, and then 6 months later you can sign a formal distribution. Who knows?
Or do an event, right? Have that whatever producer you want, like come to your place, have it set up. It's a release party. Maybe it's like a beer or spirits dinner with that producer, where you're just, it doesn't have to be big, but again, it's just all these sort of events, press. It's almost as if the digital footprint ends up being just as valuable as the product you've actually sold.
Yeah, all that other stuff. Yeah. And I think it's, you talked about, a little bit of the putting together some folks, there's like a full contract that's a take it or leave it situation. Obviously, if there's somebody that you're very comfortable working with and it's, a one-off, very small scale, you can put your arms around it. It might be a handshake thing. But I think if you're getting to any scale, especially if you're doing any level of distribution, getting into that kind of question, even if it's just hey, like, it doesn't have to be a legally binding document where you're having lawyers countersigning, but hey, here's our expectations, right? This is the volume that we're going to be making. You're going to allow us to use your logo on the package. We have no other right to it beyond the scope of this one product. IP being a whole thing, right? Here's the distribution territories we're putting it in. We've already got these 2 grocery chains signed on. We're not serving, adding any new distribution territory for this product. A bulleted list, just say this way, if there's any questions, like you could say, well, if you'll refer to my previous email, ideally it doesn't come to that, but cover yourself if you need to.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes it's helpful that I do that in my sort of initial pitch to bands and labels. And I just say, look, this is a one-off beer. We typically sell through a product in about 8 to 10 weeks. This beer is not going to be around forever. It is here to serve a promotional purpose. People enjoy it, and then it's gone, right?
Yeah.
You're not getting married to us. We're just going on, going on a date.
This is not a relationship into perpetuity. If you wanted to brew this again, if you wanted this product to be released again, you come back, we have another discussion. It's like you do a one-time batch. If we run out really quickly, we can go back to you and see if you want us to do a second batch. I think that's a really good point of just saying this is not an ongoing, we're adding this to our core lineup, this collaboration, because that's a much bigger ask. And I don't know many instances where people want to, like you said, get married in that way. I don't know. I can't think of anybody off the top of my head, but I'm sure there.
We have one like that actually.
Really?
That's a lot. Yeah. Yachtside Party Dweller is sorry for everyone who's just hearing that word combination for the first time. It's kind of silly in a vacuum, but it was a mashup of a beer called Yacht that's made by Charlestown Fermentatory and Sunnyside Dweller, which is an Ocelot beer, and we did that as a collab 3 years ago, and it's still like, at this point, it's the beer we probably make the most. And we've thought about changing it, right? Like just doing you tweak the recipe, you call it something else, right? But I think from their perspective, we're kind of just continuously doing an ad for them, right? And we like them. They make great beer. It's affiliated with them. But usually when we rebrew it, we ask someone, do you mind if we redo it again? Because their logo is going to be on there. But at this point, it's kind of just that beer exists as a collaboration. So anyway, just sort of like a weird footnote of an example where a collab kind of, I think if we knew that it was going to be a core beer, we wouldn't have made it a collab, right?
Yeah. Well, it just shows how many forms this can take. And, there's lots and lots of ways that this can pan out. But I think, all the things you covered today is helpful for people who may not have done collaborations and, want to think about just, hey, what do I do to avoid the pitfalls? What's the models that work? What if I, go to a slightly non-traditional one? I've only ever collaborated with other producers. What are some other ways to structure this? There's obviously more to talk about, but I know we're coming up to the end of our hour here. So, really appreciate your insights on this, Phil. I feel like we could obviously keep talking, but I think this was really great. Before I let you go, do you have any parting words of wisdom for our audience today?
Sure. Yeah, I would say just go for it, right? Like if be creative, think outside the box. Ask. All you got to do is send an email to someone, right, with an idea. Introduce yourself, lay it out. If they say no, who cares? It's an email. It took me 20 minutes, right? And you might end up with a really great opportunity where someone's super excited on the other end of that. And if you hadn't asked, you never would have known. So that's kind of my parting word, is to just kind of shoot your shot, and something super cool might come out of it. I
love it. Yeah. Hey, you're a living testament to that, Phil. Really, really appreciate you talking us through this kind of stuff and for sharing your time and expertise. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. Stay tuned for the next edition of the Craft Beverage webinar series coming in October. We're going to be talking about some more regulatory things with our frequent guest, Kevin Anderson. But for now, I'll say thanks again to our viewers and to you, Phil. Cheers, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Phil and Chris. This was very informative. And I guess, Phil, my husband and I will probably see you out at Ocelot in the near future.
Oh, wonderful. I'll see you there.
Yes. So I do want to thank everyone for attending today. You will receive an email with a link to the recording. If you would like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded webinars, please visit virginiasbdc.org/training. These resources are designed to be used in collaboration with your local SBDC advisors. You can sign up for a free and confidential session by emailing help@virginiasbdc.org or via our website. We hope to see you at our next session. Take care, everyone.